Hey, WanTrans here. Today I wanted to talk to you all about stat thresholds and their interactions between the stats, and pretty much how you want to build your champions and reach these stat thresholds in order to optimally build a functional champion. I highlight the term functional because I know a lot of you take a lot of hard work and dedication into farming your gear, and the worst thing that can happen is that you build a champion that does not synergize well simply because your stats are built incorrectly or prioritized wrong. And what that can do is essentially make a good champion into a very non-functional champion when you finally put him into the battlefield or put him into your defense or offense in Arena. And especially in Platinum Arena, where everybody knows how these stat interactions account for each other and what thresholds they need to meet. So this can be a real big determiner in terms of success for your future pushes in Platinum Arena. So without further ado, let's get into the information. So first we want to talk about the topic of accuracy versus resistance. And essentially, accuracy versus resistance is modeled by this graph here. I know it looks a little complex and intimidating, but it's actually really not that bad. But before I explain it, I want to first give credit to Road from Reddit. He essentially managed to data mine this equation here, which resembles how accuracy and resistance interacts in the game. And to my knowledge and to his knowledge, this is the actual equation that the game goes by. So this is 100% correct information. So great appreciation for him for doing this work for us. So very quickly, all you really need to understand here is that on the vertical axis, it's the chance to land a debuff. And on the horizontal axis, it's accuracy minus resistance. So these numbers here, like minus 60 here, minus 50 right here, these are essentially the difference between the accuracy and the resistance of your opponent. So essentially, when your accuracy and resistance are equal, you have a 92.5% chance to land the debuff. So as you can see, accuracy is very strong in the sense that you don't even need to have more accuracy than the opponent's resistance in order to successfully land a debuff at a very high chance. And all you really need is 25 accuracy more than the enemy's resistance in order to land a debuff 96% of the time. There is diminishing returns, and you know a lot of endgame players, they talk about getting 3%ed. This is essentially what it means as the more accuracy you push, you'll eventually cap out at a 97% success rate. And then on the contrary here, you'll notice that resistance is much weaker against accuracy. And you'll notice that for it to become actually beneficial and actually reliable, you'll need at least around like 150 more resistance than your opponent's accuracy in order for you to resist 95% of the time. Or in other words, if your accuracy is 150 or so less than the opponent's resistance, you only have a 5% chance to land your debuff. So in this consideration, all you really need to understand from this is that you need 150 more resistance than your opponent's accuracy in order to successfully resist, and you need 25 more accuracy than your opponent's resist in order to successfully land a debuff. So again here, just a quick reiteration. All you need is 150 more resistance over your enemy's accuracy, and all you need is 25 more accuracy over the enemy's resistance. So now comes the stat targets you want to really reach when you're thinking of accuracy and resistance on your own champions. So first, when you're building your defense, you have to consider the enemy's accuracy. So I kind of broke this down into 3 separate levels of accuracy that you will most likely be encountering in Platinum Arena. So first off, you have these hybrid champions, such as like Kymar, where you need a lot of speed, or Warlord as well, which a lot of people build with a lot of speed, and Molly, because you need a lot of HP and defensive stats, you're unable to push a lot of accuracy, and because of that, you will more often than not encounter Kymar, Warlord, and Mollies from enemy teams with only around 550 accuracy, and in which case, according to that formula, you'll need around 700 resistance to successfully resist those. And now if you're talking about resisting Madame Ceres, beginning with Immunity 1, you can expect that high-end top Platinum players will have at least around 650 accuracy on it, in which case you need 800 resistance in order to successfully resist her. Or if you're talking about a standard Madame Ceres, you're expecting around 750 accuracy on her, and in which case you need a whopping 900 resistance to resist her. So this is why a lot of people want to force immunity, because at least it gives you a more realistic resistance threshold to reach, as 900 resistance is almost unrealistic to reach, even with a 4-piece, 6-piece resistance set with like very perfect stats. This is just absurd. I would highly suggest that if you cannot push at least 700 resistance on your defense champions, then don't really build resist at all, and instead just focus on HP and defense, as low resistance levels in Plat, as you can see, are completely ineffective and you'd just be losing potential other stats. Now when you're considering building offense, you have to consider the enemy's resistance. So generally, if somebody is going to build a very high resistance defense, you're going to expect around 800 resistance on their overall team, or at least for the units that matter. So in this regard, you can expect around 825 accuracy that you'll need in order to reliably successfully strip this type of high resistance type of defense. Now, if you're talking about like hybrid revivers or resist warlords, generally people like to build around the 575 resistance mark up to around 625. But I put this a little bit at a lower range, just so you can feel better that you don't need too much stats, honestly. But realistically, you'll need around at least 600 accuracy to successfully debuff these hybrid higher resistance revivers and higher resistance warlords. Now, if you're talking about other standard units, such as somebody attacking you with a Madame Ceres or attacking you with, say, like a Trunda, you cannot, or you do not need to expect any higher than 225 or so resistance, and all you really need is around 250 accuracy in order to successfully land your debuffs on those units. So I wanted to give you more like a closer example in terms of how my own champions are built in regards to accuracy and resistance. So first I want to start off with Krisk. You'll notice that Krisk here, I've built him at around 250 accuracy, and the purpose for him not having crazy amount of accuracy is, again, like I've mentioned just previously, I only want to be able to land these debuffs on units such as Madame Ceres's and Trundas from enemy teams that are attacking me. So in that regard, this accuracy level is perfectly enough. Now, in regards to something, say like a Tormin, this Shield Tormin actually only has around 300 or so accuracy, which is honestly a little bit too much. I can honestly swap this accuracy banner I probably have on him into something more like an HP banner in order to lower this accuracy level, because 320 is a little bit too high for most cases, as his general purpose is to freeze the Madame Ceres and Trundas on opponent teams, and all they have is around 225 or so resistance at most. Now, if you're talking about someone with a lot higher accuracy, such as my Warlord here, you'll notice that I have him built at nearly 780 accuracy, and this is essentially enough to almost lock out any type of teams I encounter, even those very high resist ones, as accuracy is much stronger than resist. Now, on the counterpart, if you're talking about building resist units in order to try and resist your opponent's accuracy from their Madames or from their crowd control units such as Kaimar, for example, my Warlord here, I built him up to around 610 resistance, and he's more like a hybrid because I really need to be able to focus a lot on speed as well. So under most circumstances, I'll be able to avoid crowd control from enemy hybrid crowd control units such as like Molly or Kaimar. Now, in the same respect, if I'm talking about an immunity Molly, because I have to focus so much on HP and defense here, you'll notice that my accuracy is only able to be pushed at around 550. So this is really only enough to reliably lock out or crowd control those hybrid revivers. And then in this sense here, my higher resistance Duchess Lilitu you'll notice that only I'm able to push around 620 resistance on her, and essentially I run her with a resist lead such as Siphi's, and that'll push her to around 700 resistance. And her purpose here actually is to be able to reliably resist those hybrid crowd control units such as Kaimar and Molly. So as you can see from my experience in Platinum Arena and even from my own units, you want to focus these resistance levels depending on what you want to resist from these enemy accuracy units. And these are the accuracy values you want to reach in order to successfully land your debuffs or your strips on enemy resistance teams with these scenarios. So now we move on to the topic of defense mitigation, and this chart in particular, or this graph I should say, is once again accredited to the work of Road from Reddit. Both this graph and the graph I shown previously in regards to accuracy versus resistance, those two graphs will be down in the description below if you want the original link and you want to give support to those people who were responsible for making this. Again, much thanks to those people, especially Road. And now, again, all you really need to understand here is that the horizontal axis is defense and the vertical axis here is damage percent. So what this really says is that as your defense increases, the amount of percent damage that you incur on your units is much lower. So as you can see, this runs quite a big slope here at the beginning, and then it plateaus off. So what this shows is that defense is again showing diminishing returns. And so I think two very specific values you should be looking at in this graph is this 25% mitigation, or 75% mitigation mark I should say. This is a 25% damage you would incur on your units if you had 3,200 defense. And likewise, if you want to look upwards to 20% damage incurred, and likewise 80% damage mitigation, you're looking at around 4,200 defense. So I would say based on this graph and the nature of it in terms of diminishing returns, you really want to be focusing anywhere between 3,200 and 4,200 defense as a sweet spot, and any more than that should be really pushed into HP, as you would get a lot more out of it in terms of helping your units survive, rather than if you were to push more and more on defense. The only exception to this where I can see you pushing crazy amounts of defense like 6k is if you're building a defense-based nuker, in which case you're building it for the means of damage and not for the means of sustainability. So just to reiterate, this is very simple. All you want to do is aim in between 3,200 to 4,200 defense, and you want to pump the rest of your stats into raw HP. And again, I wanted to drive the point home by showing you essentially how I built my champions, again, in terms of synergizing the stats correctly and ensuring that I am getting the most out of my stats and my gear. So you'll see that Duchess Lilitu is in between that sweet spot of 3,200 defense and 4,200 defense, and I pushed essentially the rest of the stats onto HP. And normally speaking, for people who build a high HP and high defense Duchess, you will notice that they have around this much defense, but they'll be able to push at upwards of 100k to even 110k HP if they weren't focusing so much on resistance. So you'll notice that as you push resistance up, you're going to be losing other stats such as HP, and that's just the balance of things. You'll need to rely on like a shield unit to make up for this lost HP generally if you're running a higher resistance build. And in the same regard, for my Siphi here, you'll also notice that I am building at around between 3,200 and 4,200 defense, and all the rest is pushed upwards into HP. And then just a third example here is my Cardinal. If I can find her, there she is. Again, you want to push between 4,200 and 3,200 defense, and the rest being pushed all into HP here. Alright, so the last topic is of course the ratio between attack and crit damage you want to aim for your nukers. And I know in the past there was a lot of debate between content creators and other players about what is the sweet spot in terms of attack to crit damage ratio in order to maximize your nuker's damage output. And my opinion on this is that the fact of the matter is that when you're pushing and trying to aim for 100% crit rate to cap out your crit, you're going to be noticing that your gear pieces that you're able to switch around are limited, and you're actually unable to actually move this attack to crit damage ratio too much. So in this regard, my sweet rule of thumb is that you always want to reach around 5,500 attack and 250 crit damage, and after this point you want to push both as high as possible afterwards. And again, I know a lot of content creators in the past has pushed out like a special formula where you put in the nuker's base attack and it will spit out like the special attack to crit damage ratio you should be aiming for. But the way I see it is honestly that this game is more complex than it needs to be already, and there's no need to apply those crazy formulas to it. As long as you're reaching these minimum thresholds in terms of attack and crit damage, and you're at least improving attack or crit damage, you're going to be getting higher damage yield. And of course, you can min-max a little bit with a damage calculator, and that is up to you. And sometimes the amount of return is not worth the amount of time invested. So that said, just keep in mind to reach these stat thresholds and don't go for some extremes, such as for example 7,000 attack and only 150 crit damage, or the counterpart is like 300 crit damage but only like for example 4,000 attack. Those are definitely not going to synergize well, and you just want to keep a happy medium and your nukers will perform just fine. So we're back in my roster here. I'm just going to quickly show you some of my nuker champions I've built in the past and that I use currently. And you will notice that I follow the same rule of thumb that I have been preaching. So I practice what I preach. So first off, we'll show this Trunda here. As you can see, she has clearly above 5,500 attack and above 250 crit damage. And the fact is, right after those thresholds, I did not care if I was improving a lot more attack than crit damage, or a lot more crit damage than attack, because both those will improve her damage, and that's the end goal. And similarly for my double Rotos here, same idea. You'll notice that I at least have 5,500 attack and at least 250 crit damage. And again with my other Rotos, you'll notice the exact same, except I'm able to actually push even a little bit higher attack here and a little bit higher crit damage, but again above those minimum thresholds I've mentioned. And then one last example here is my Yannicka. I know she's not exactly perfect as she has speed boots on, unlike my slower nukers I just showed, but as you can see, I'm aiming towards that 5,500 attack range and the 250 crit damage range. I hope that this video gave you a better understanding of the stat thresholds, especially accuracy and resistance that you'll find in Platinum Arena, and give you better insight in terms of how to optimally build functional units for both your offense and defense for your future Platinum Arena reset pushes, or just overall Arena in general, and even the ideas behind HP, defense, accuracy, resistance, attack, and crit damage, and their interactions between the other opposite stat will still apply even in PvE content. So overall, I hope that this video was helpful and informative, and I hope to see you guys soon in another video. WAN Trans out.